So we're putting a second row of seats in our van. They're factory Ford Transit seats. We're going to put 2 of the rails in the floor. So to do that, I'm going to pull off this extra piece that I don't want to have to drill an extra hole for, and then drill out the rivet. Alright, so these Ford Transit seats, the rails that go in, there's 2 connection points. The first one is a hook. So whenever you actually connect the seat, the floor would be flat. You'd actually lean the seats forward to hook in. And then as you went to set the rest of the seat down on the back, it would come in contact with this last piece and actually click in. And then to remove them, you would pull the lever to release it in order to do the reverse with the seats to take them out. So we got the second row set up in the area where it's going to go. We kind of moved some of the foam out of the way for now. Basically just working on getting positioned where we want and as far forward as we possibly can. The stool would be comfortable for somebody sitting in here with proper leg space. That way we can maximize the room behind it because we want to put a cabinet and a permanent kind of countertop refrigerator. When this is removed, we'll probably do some kind of like pop-up counter or temporary like counter that we can pop in to replace that space and still utilize that area. We won't have this in all that often unless we have multiple people traveling with us. Alright, so I think we've got the seats where we want them. We actually moved them over a few more inches on the opposite side of this rib. And this gives us really good clearance underneath the van to access this. When we actually had it originally on this side of the rib was right on top of where the chassis actually is, so we wouldn't be able to access those bolts. So I've ran measurements underneath the van for both rails. So the driver's side, I will have to lower the gas tank in order to get to those bolts, both to drill the hole so I don't hit the gas tank, and then also so I can put the nuts and stuff on the back side of them. This side, it's pretty much completely open underneath, so this one will be pretty much just drill and bolted in and we'll be good. I did run some measurements front and back just to make sure that the rails were square, and then we went through and looked at how the actual connecting points are centered in the rails to make sure there's some wiggle room. That way once these are bolted in, we still have some minor adjustments that we can do so that this doesn't become any kind of binding issue when we go to load it. So we're going to go through and mark every one of these holes in the rail with a Sharpie directly to the floor, and then take the seats out, and then we can move on to actually drilling out the holes. So cutting through cold rolled steel with a hacksaw sucks. Tried actually using a jigsaw and the blade just is garbage. It's supposed to be for thick metal. It just pretty much tore all the actual teeth off, and it's just a piece of flat metal. It barely cut the stuff. Hacksaw works, but it's quite a workout. And I've got to cut a 12-inch and a 14-inch piece just for one bracket, and I'll have to do the same for the second bracket. This will go underneath the van, so I'll drill the same matching holes on this as I did in the floor, and then align them underneath. I'll actually put a couple coats of paint on this, and then once we go to bolt it all together, finally I'll put some sealant in between this and the holes that are coming through from the inside so that no water gets in, and then probably put a coat of rubberized undercoating on this and the entire underneath of the floor and the hardware. Try to prevent any moisture and rust from occurring. But basically what it'll do is this bracket will become a kind of a load balancing. So if at any point we got an accident and the seats had people in it, that weight that wants to try to rip the seats up out of the floor will kind of disperse the weight between this bar and the floor and everything, so that it doesn't just like rip the bolts directly through the floor. It would actually have to rip this bar completely through the floor in 2 spots. Well, 4 technically with both sides. All right. So on this plate, I've put it underneath the van and used some like welding magnets to hold it in place. And I marked the center holes from above. I brought it back and actually translated those lines to the exact placement and then re-centered them in the bar so they're not off to weird angles. That way when I actually go to bolt this in, the weight will be pretty evenly distributed around this whole space. So now that I have the marks, I'm going to drill a couple pilot holes and then expand them to a larger hole and then test fit them. So I got the first bracket done. This will be on the passenger side. So I have 2 for each side of the van. I got the second one cut, so I need to mark the holes and drill those. Drilling this steel is quite the challenge. I have a couple of step bits that I'm using to get to the appropriate size. They seem to work the best. So the bolts fit fairly tight. They're still loose enough that if there's some misalignment underneath the van that this will work well. The holes will actually drill in the floor. They're pretty tight to the bolt. We'll use a lock washer and a lock nut and then some Loctite on the threads itself so that it doesn't ever come loose. Once we bolt it in, we'll put some sealant or some like rubberized undercoating underneath the van so no moisture can get to this. And hopefully we won't have any rust or corrosion issues. I'll put some black, like Rust-Oleum paint, a couple coats on these brackets before I actually mount them underneath the van as well. Finish bolting these seats in, we have all of our holes drilled. I've painted the metal so we won't get any rust. And we've fabricated these steel brackets which will go on the underside of the van. To finish it up, I'm using the factory little plastic or metal clips that go into the rails, and they hold a large metal plate, kind of like a washer inside the track. Then we're running these grade 8 hardware through the floor, through the actual brackets. And then we'll have a grade 8 washer on the other side of the bracket, and then a nylon locking nut. I'll use a little bit of thread lock as well so they don't come loose. And I'll probably put a little bit of sealant on the underside between the metal bracket and the floor so that no moisture goes up through there at any point. I'm putting 4 bolts in the rail. I do have 2 extra places I could put some bolts in later on if I wanted to. I may just put some smaller ones and just do like a rib nut. It's not nearly as secure, but it's just another anchor point. It's just kind of overkill at that point probably. So I'm going to go lay down in some snow and put these bolts on. With the rails bolted in, we started working on the foam insulation and getting it cut around the seat rails. We want to have the seat rails hidden underneath the floor when we're done. So on the next episode, we'll pick up from here and install the subfloor and the final vinyl flooring as well. See you on the next episode.